Chapter 1200. The second was the fallen red dragon Varistaz. The third was the draconic beast Broodmother. The fourth was the adult black dragon Fillmore. The fifth was also the adult black dragon Ebonrock. It could be said that other than the fallen red dragon, if the other bosses came one by one, they would definitely be sent to their deaths. But if they came together, it would be fun. The ancient red dragon Varistaz's movements were incomparably ferocious. A pair of scarlet claws tore through the wall in front of him as if it was a piece of paper. He was clearly using the most direct method to tell Duque and the others what an ancient beast was, but his mouth was muttering something that made one's heart ache. Duke Marcus. It's too late. Nefarian's power of corruption has already taken effect. I can't control myself. His hatred and anger have made me unprecedentedly powerful. Run, mortals. The anger of the Blackstone King is surging in my blood. Please, I beg of you, run before I lose my mind. The black flame is burning in my heart, I have to release him. The pitiful ancient red dragon begged Duque and the others to escape, but his companion did not appreciate it. The black dragon Fillmore pounced and pressed his claws on the back of Varistaz's head, laughing coldly. Idiot. Since you've fallen, you should enjoy the pleasure of falling. In the name of the great black dragon King Nefarian, go. Kill these invaders. Red-skinned slaves. Flames, death, destruction. You mortals, let Lord Nefarian's power. No, I want to fight. Alexstrasza, help me, I must fight to the end. The red dragon desperately prayed to the queen he worshipped and believed in. Unfortunately, his queen was destined to be unable to answer his call. This was because Alexstrasza was either trapped in the void battlefield in the universe, unable to leave, or she was dealing with the Silithus bug tide. Nefarian's trap and the whispers of the ancient god Enzos were a terrifying combination that easily exceeded the limits of his willpower. Varistaz, who was crying dragon tears and uttering the most unbearable words of repentance, pounced on Roland. On the other side, Magni, Grom, and Cain shouted the same name, Duque. The more dangerous the situation was, the more they needed a clear order and a unified will. At times like this, even the wrong order was 10,000 times better than doing nothing. Duque's expression was firm and his gaze was firm. Every word he said was like a lighthouse in the dark sky, guiding everyone's heart. Old Bull Dragon Beast, Shorty Double Flight, Gavin Red Dragon, focus fire with me. There were only 10 people, yet they had to face 4 bosses at once. If it were any other team, they would have already chosen to bow their heads to fate and await death in despair and fear. They, on the other hand, had gone through so many trials and tribulations along the way. When had they not faced terrifying existences that transcended the mortal world as mere mortals? The Lich King, Archimonde Ragnaros. He wrote his will again and again, but every time he came back, he would throw it into the wastepaper basket with a bitter smile. Looking back, he felt a sense of relief in his heart. A true warrior dared to face the most terrifying life. In the face of evil, someone had to stand up. Since fate had chosen him, then he would use the brightest smile to face the darkest and most hopeless situation. As long as he believed in Duque, he might once again be able to turn the enemy into ashes in the blink of an eye. Ha 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 ha. Who was laughing so boldly? Ha 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 ha. Who was it that was facing a tragic death? At this moment where time seemed to stop, everyone in the team suddenly let go of everything. No race, no gender, no occupation. Come on. Let's hurt each other. Let your Grandpa Bull teach you what it means to fight. Cain charged forward violently, crashing straight into the dragon leader, Broodmother Leroy. The 2 huge humanoid creatures crashed into each other like Mars crashing into Earth. This was a clash of strength against strength. This was the purest form of violence between males. The moment the 2 of them crashed into each other, there was a muffled sound like an earthquake. The next moment, both of their feet sank deep into the solid ground. Their muscles swelled and their veins popped. In just a short second they had fought countless rounds. Shifting his center of gravity, turning his hand to capture. In the end, Old Bull's technique was better. With a swift twist of his wrist, he grabbed Broodmother Leroy's neck, and then pushed the dragon leader to the exit of the labyrinth like a bulldozer. Gravel flew everywhere, and he pushed the dragon leader to the exit of the labyrinth in one breath. That shorty Magni was even more awesome. Not only did he use Deity's Descent, he seized the opportunity when the 2 adult black dragons were trying to pass through the hole that Varistaz had created and immediately charged over with charge. It had to be said that the Dwarf King's ability to grasp the right timing was impeccable. It should have been 3 giant dragons rushing in one after another into the hall where first boss Razorgar was, but the Dwarf King had let Valestras in, and then moved to block the opening that wasn't too big. A normal powerhouse wouldn't be able to become a door god, but the enlarged Magni was the size of a one-story house. He used his height and width to block in front of the two black dragons. If it was someone else, the two black dragons would probably have broken through. But Magni was wielding the famous flaming demon hammer. Breaking through meant that they would have to engage in close combat with Magni. Facing that divine hammer that stood at the pinnacle of the fire element, Firemo and Ebonrock were afraid. They decisively unleashed their dragon's breath at Magni. Who knew, God's descent was the most impudent move. In this state, the Dwarf King was practically immune to magic. In addition to the fire resistance that the flaming demon hammer gave him, before the effect of God's descent ended, even a god wouldn't be able to burn him easily. The darn shorty was smug. Come on. Continue acting. Do you want to come and fight with me? Magni almost made the lungs of the two black dragons explode from anger. But so what? Before Magni's enhanced state ended, he was undefeatable. However, everyone's focus was still on the battle between the remaining 8 people and the fallen red dragon. Velestras, the infamous fallen red dragon that had caused countless guilds to disband and left countless players with painful and unforgettable memories, was the key to the entire battle. Ha! Master Howl leaped over with a violent aura, scaring Duque so much that his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Damn, you're a weapon warrior, how can you tank a boss? The next moment, Gavinrad's sword slashed over, and it was as if a storm had been stirred up. The powerful nature attribute damage easily attracted the red dragon's attention. Remember? Little red dragon, the person who killed you is called Gavinrad. Chapter 1201. Duque bared his teeth. In the past, Gavinrad was a good young man who knew his place. When he was Duque's bodyguard, he stood guard at the door and didn't ask questions that he shouldn't ask. If anyone dared to come, he would block them. But now that he had a divine artifact sword, the sea, they were all King wild. At least that was what it looked like. If Magni and Cain walked the path of absolute violence, Gavinrad was more of the technical type. Most of the divine artifacts that appeared in the world were huge weapons. Just the weight alone made Duque want to die. Although, Thunder Fury, Blessed Sword of the Windseeker, wasn't as exaggerated as Ashbringer, it was definitely a two-handed sword that normal people couldn't hold with one hand. But Gavinrad could swing the wind sword like a windmill, left and right. Because he swung it so fast, it looked like he was swinging a huge whip instead of a lightning sword that looked like a fork. Zap 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 zap. The terrifying sound of wind breaking rang in everyone's ears. Zap 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 zap. It sounded like thousands of lightning snakes dancing in the air. The sound of wind and thunder filled everyone's ears. No one noticed that a faint red aura permeated the surroundings. That was Veristas' red dragon essence. An ancient red dragon that sought self-destruction after his fall was using this method to nourish his enemies. His mind was in a mess, but his heart still yearned for the light. He still tried to help these invaders as much as he could. He attacked every mortal in a frenzy, but he also hoped that this small team of mortals could really create a miracle and end his fall, even if it meant the end of his life. Whoosh! Another circle of scorching flames spread on the red dragon's huge body. If someone had a weak resistance to fire, they would probably have been burnt to a crisp in that instant. Duque raised his hand, and a wall of fire suddenly blocked the red dragon's flaming nova. He absorbed the red dragon's flames at a higher temperature. However, Veristas was not scary because of the itchy flames, but because of combustion stimulation. Kalia suddenly discovered that her entire body was bathed in flames. This flame did not burn her body. Instead, it stimulated her, and a strong sense of excitement rose in her chest. She suddenly discovered that not only did she have an almost inexhaustible amount of magic power under the nourishment of the red dragon essence, but all her healing spells that required casting time were now instantaneous, as if she had learned all the metamagic abilities in this area in an instant. Duque. Focus on healing for 15 seconds, then leave it to me. Kalia realized that Duque's face was actually dark. Of course, Duque was worried. Because in the original history, all the people who were hit by burn stimulation could first deal crazy damage for 15 seconds, and then no more than 20 seconds at most, the excess red dragon magic in the body would exceed the limit that the human body could bear, directly causing the person to explode and die. Not only would the person under the spell die, but they could also blow up their teammates when they self-destructed. If he had not snatched the divinity of Ragnaros, Duque would not have fought with the fallen Veristas like this. Perhaps he would have taken a gamble and let Onyxia and the red dragon fight each other. But firstly, Duque always felt that Nefarian would do something bad to Onyxia. Secondly, after snatching the divinity of fire, Duque had a deeper understanding of his own magic control. If Duque's control of flames before was limited to every single flame, then now that Duque had the divinity of fire, his control could even be refined down to every single molecule, and adjust the direction of each high-energy pulse. Kalia cast spells nervously, but the feeling of terror and unease of having a ticking time bomb in her body filled her heart. She could still cast spells without any disorder purely because she had absolute trust in Duque. If Brother Duque said to leave it to him, then leave it to him. If it weren't for him, I would have been a dead person 15 years ago. For some reason, at times like this, it was easier to recall the past. Kalia suddenly thought of the ice rose that Duque had given her, of Duque's grand marriage kidnapping, of the 10 years of freedom that he had given her, and at some point Kalia's eyes were already filled with tears, and they almost burst out. Duque, I really have never regretted it. Duque did not have the time to care about Kalia's maiden heart. A pair of fiery big hands were directly placed on Kalia's back. He was using his superior elemental control to control Kalia's magic circuits with a half-hearted effort. Where is it? Duque firmly believed that there would not be a self-destruction for no reason. Whether it was red dragon essence or combustion stimulation, it must have been Veristas using some form of influence on the human body, and in the end it overloaded the human body and caused the tragedy. Duque scanned Kalia's body in various ways and from various angles at a frequency of 100 times per second. Kalia felt a strong sense of shame for no reason. It was not just like a pure girl suddenly being viciously violated by a hooligan. It was more like selling her body and soul on a deeper level. Kalia's entire body trembled, but she still did not resist. She stopped casting spells and leaned back almost backwards, relying on the support of Duque's hands to keep her standing. What was the key? Large beads of sweat seeped out of Duque's forehead. Suddenly Duque had a discovery. Duque scolded softly. He pushed with all his might, almost causing Kalia to fall forward. But the effect was obvious. Everyone could see that between Kalia's white breasts, a fireball the size of a baby's fist seeped out as if it was seeping blood, and suddenly shot out. Bang! There was a loud sound. It was a terrifying explosion caused by the purest fire elements accumulating. Damn it! The concentration of fire elements is too high, causing the human body to become a large fire elemental door? Duque muttered. At this moment, Kalia was in Duque's arms in a standard princess carry position, panting heavily. She knew her own body best. It was obvious that she had been hovering at the gates of hell just now, and it was purely Duque who had pulled her back. Duque, I believe in you, forever, Korea said with a smile. Suddenly Gavinrad screamed, Boss, I've been hit by that thing too? Do I have to be carried by you in a princess hug to survive? 18 seconds later, Duque kicked Gavinrad flat on his face, and then a ball of fire jumped out and exploded. Chapter 1202. Roar. The fallen Valistras' eyes were bloodshot. His yellow pupils were now covered in a bloody mist. Before the flames accumulated and Gavinrad's body exploded, his target had always been Gavinrad. However, after the explosion he seemed to suddenly lose interest in this holy knight who was shining with golden light and using the power of wind and lightning to deal heavy damage to him. No matter how brave Gavinrad was, how coquettish he was, or how he taunted him, the red dragon ignored him. He chose to attack the target he liked. Arg. Vanessa, who had been waving her daggers around near the dragon's abdomen and dealing a lot of damage to Valistras, suddenly realized that the dragon had turned around. Being stared at by a pair of eyes filled with madness, Vanessa was so scared that she almost peed her pants. Subconsciously, she cast invisibility to make herself disappear from the dragon's sight and senses. Where are you looking at? Big lizard. At this critical juncture, Lord Howl stepped forward. Grom leaped high in an unscientific manner. That leap at the cost of burning his fury allowed him to cross a height of 30 meters in an instant and fly straight to the ceiling of the hall. Lord Howl did an unexpected and nimble somersault in the air, allowing himself to stand upside down. His legs pressed against the ceiling like springs, and he used the momentum of falling to the ground to push himself back down. Lord Howl's full-powered attack had the power to kill an abyssal lord. Not to mention, Red Dragon Essence also gave him extraordinary fury energy. Blood Roar's mournful crimson light actually suppressed the radiance of Red Dragon Essence that the Red Dragon had spread in the air. Boom! The huge impact produced a violent force akin to that of a tactical nuclear bomb. Even the red dragon, whose body had been strengthened by the power of corruption, could not withstand this blow. Arg! Valestras let out a very human-like scream. Everyone could see that there was a bone-deep axe mark on his extended left dragon claw. The tough dragon scales, tough dragon skin, and sturdy dragon flesh were all unable to withstand this attack. Arg! Tyrion Fordring, who had been playing by the rules since the start of the battle, suddenly launched an attack. If Mograine's Ashbringer was a sun that illuminated the entire land and made evil have nowhere to hide, then Tyrion's Ashbringer was like using the best steel on the edge of a blade. Tyrion was already recognized as the #1 person in the Holy Light. This was not a false praise but a very solid ranking. Saidan was more like a pure martial artist. His understanding of martial arts was above that of Holy Light. Gavinrad's talent had gone awry. He was now more like a thunder warrior than a paladin. Turalian's Holy Light was the weakest among the 5 Silver Saints from the very beginning because his specialty was in commanding an army. If he had not inherited Lothar's Quell Zarum, his combat power would probably only be second-rate. The purity and strength of Theon's Holy Light were far superior to the other 3, but he still used the Holy Light in his body in a stingy way. Now he was using his performance to tell everyone why. The bright Holy Light was long, narrow, and beautiful. Theon wielded Ashbringer as if it were a paper fan, splitting the hall that was filled with a scarlet aura into 2. The golden sword light fell, and the space seemed to be strangely distorted. The fallen ancient red dragon moved its body, and a line of blood that emitted golden light appeared along its shoulder and the wound on its left claw, running across its entire claw. The golden line continued to extend backward, leaving a dazzling golden ripple in the air. It swept across the hall, which was quite small for a dragon. Wherever it passed, the benches that should have been used by Razorgore's orcs were broken in rows. With a crisp crack, the golden line swept across the scorching western wall of the hall. The perfectly straight and slanted black line on the wall rapidly expanded in a few seconds, turning into a bottomless ravine. Time seemed to stop at that moment. The huge dragon claw hung limply. Its muscles, tendons, and bones had been completely severed. Only a small piece of tough dragon skin was left holding it together. Valestras, who had suddenly lost his balance, fell face first onto the ground. He was in an extremely sorry state. The red dragon's fall was like sending itself to the back of its neck. How could the powerhouses let go of such an opportunity? Gavinrad was the first to pounce. His divine artifact sword was wrapped in bright purple lightning. If the wind sword was replaced with a hammer, he would be the god of thunder Thor. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Gavinrad's full-powered attack directly pierced the weakest joint between the dragon's neck and body. Ah! As Valestras screamed, his long snake-like neck snapped in half and bit Gavinrad out of reflex. Holy Light rose and Gavinrad activated his invincibility. Even though he was protected by the holy golden light, his sharp teeth still bit the light shield, producing a terrifying sound that made one's teeth ache. Sasha suddenly used aimed shot, and the arrow, which had been charged up to the maximum, hit the dragon's jaw. It only stopped the red dragon for less than 1/10 of a second before the powerful bite was activated again. If the invincibility period was over, Gavinrad would be finished. Boss, do something, or I'll die. Gavinrad was so scared that he almost peed his pants. I'm coming. Duque came as soon as he said he would. With a flash, he appeared on the dragon's back. The divine artifact sword in his hand, which shone with flames and the light of wind and lightning, pierced into the back of Valestras' neck through the terrifying wound that Gavinrad had created. The spiral-like blade avoided the protrusion on the neck and pierced through the gap between 2 vertebrae, stabbing into the red dragon's cervical nerves. Sizzle. A strong electric current traveled along the red dragon's nerves to its entire body. The huge dragon's body immediately convulsed and then it froze. A second later, Duque stood on the dragon's head and pressed down with his magic palm. Sensing that Duque was invading his spiritual world, the red dragon screamed in despair. No, it's too late. My memories have been erased, and half of my soul has been destroyed. I'll only be a slave to the Black Dragon King. Give up on me. I don't want to make my sins even worse. There's more than one Nefarian among the so-called Black Dragon Kings. Duque laughed as he raised a 1/5 of platinum high up. This is... Valestras' pupils suddenly constricted as he felt a coercive force coming from above. Chapter 1203. Just as Duque smashed the platinum disc onto the Crimson Dragon's head, Nefarian, who was sitting on the throne on the highest floor of the Blackrock Spire, jumped up as if his butt had been pricked. He could clearly feel that he had lost control of the Crimson Dragon's soul. It wasn't because of the Crimson Dragon's death. Instead, it was because an even stronger power had forcefully seized control from him. This was a resounding slap to his face. He knew what was going on. He claimed to be the king of black dragons, the supreme ruler of all black dragons. Now he was defeated by the remaining power of his father. Even if Duque had used a trick, it was still a devastating blow to his confidence and pride. His face turned green and red. His swollen face was filled with gloominess. Suddenly, a seductive and sinister voice barged into Nefarian's mind uninvited. Seems like you need help? No. It's none of your business. Enzos, Nefarian said firmly, I remember very clearly that I did not call you. I'm just here to remind you that Onyxia, whom you view as a sacrifice, isn't in your lair. Enzo sneered. But Duque is here. Nefarian argued. I hope your toy can take care of this legendary human. Enzo said noncommittally. Nefarian's face turned red and his fists trembled. On the other hand, the Crimson Dragon faced an outcome that he had never imagined. Duque had miraculously seized control of him from Nefarian. This is. The violent dark power that had caused him to fall was rapidly dissipating in his body. His power to surpass his own limits was obtained at the cost of burning his life and soul. As the dark power dissipated, what replaced the frenzy and numbness was unimaginable pain in his body, mind, and soul. The sudden and terrifying impact was enough to destroy the rationality of most living beings. As a powerful being who had maintained a certain degree of rationality in the darkest of times, Velastrath's willpower was undoubtedly shocking. However, no matter how ambitious he was, he did not dare to imagine that there would be a time when he could escape from the abyss. The dragon's face was filled with shock and confusion. Sensing that the giant dragon under his feet had stopped struggling and convulsing, Duque said loudly, Relax your will, don't resist, and recognize me as your master. Otherwise, Nefarian will still have a chance to take back your control. Although he did not understand how Duque did it, but with the relationship between Duque and his queen, obeying Duque was a million times better than obeying the evil Black Dragon King. Veristaz immediately did as he was told, allowing Duque's will to invade his soul and turn his spiritual world upside down. He could clearly feel the slave imprint that was branded in the deepest part of his soul, filled with shame, being rewritten. It changed from a ferocious black dragon head to a blue whirlwind. It was impossible for him to know that this was Duque's trick. Duque first simulated the authority of the Black Dragon King that was recognized by the world of Azeroth with Neltharian's scales in the dragon's soul, and overrode Nefarian's authority. Then he got Neltharian to transfer the ownership of Veristaz to the owner of the Platinum Disc, which was Duque himself. These layers of tricks were all based on one fact. The arrogant Nefarian had defined the highest authority as the king of the Black Dragons, and not Nefarian's name. This was a loophole, and Dooku was the only one in the world who could exploit it. It was not until Duque finished all this in 10 seconds that he heaved a sigh of relief. However, this was not the end because the battle was still going on. Duque turned his head. Kalia, help old cow. The rest help Magni. Everyone dispersed and went back to their own duties. On the ground, Veristaz seemed to be still in a dream. I'm free? But, thank you, Duke Marcus. I'll try my best to go to the Dragonbone Waste myself. Feeling his terrible condition, Veristaz no longer had any hope of survival. The berserk dark energy drained him too much, easily surpassing the limits of what an ancient giant dragon could endure. Although he looked like he had a broken claw and his spine had been pierced by a sword, he was actually an empty shell inside. Under the shiny dragon scales and dragon skin were the remaining dry muscles and flesh that had been overdrawn and squeezed. At this moment he was like a sick dragon that was too old to move. Is the despair in your eyes only at this level? Duque's sarcastic tone made Veristaz uncomfortable. If Duque wasn't the one who pulled him out of the dark abyss, he might have already spat dragon breath at him. Just as he was about to say something, Duque continued, Sorry, I've seen even deeper and more terrifying despair in the ancient war. You participated in the ancient war? That's right. You're that Dukong. As an old dragon who had also participated in the cruel ancient war, Veristaz suddenly became spirited. No one else can save you. That doesn't mean that I can't save you. Suddenly, an emerald light of life appeared in Duque's hand. This is. The red dragon's vertical pupils suddenly constricted. Of course he knew what it was. This was the life blessing of his most respected queen. With it, no matter how serious the injury, even if he was on his last breath, he could still be full of vigor and revive on the spot the next moment. His eyes suddenly revealed an endless desire for survival. But in the next instant he gave up on himself. "No. Don't give me His Majesty's treasure, I don't deserve it." I failed. Not only did I fail to keep an eye on Nefarian, but I even became his minion and slaughtered countless innocent mortals. I'm guilty. Smack. The red dragon was slapped by a huge palm made of arcane energy. Enough. Do you really want to die like this and let the Doomsday Army have another bone dragon to control? Veristaz was frightened by this terrifying future, but he still hesitated. But my soul is damaged and my strength can never return to before. Ignoring the opinion of this kind but strangely stubborn silly dragon, Duque directly pressed the Red Dragon Queen's life blessing into his head. Following the silly dragon's scream, a powerful life force was injected into his broken body, rapidly healing every wound on his body. His blood vessels that had been tortured by the violent power, his muscles that were bleeding everywhere, and his heart that was starting to fail, everything was reactivated by this life force. Enough. Stop calling me. If you really can't find a future for yourself, go be my woman's mount. Chapter 1204. Duke, the Great Hoodwinker, was really addicted to hoodwinking mounts. Although Veristaz was not as good at fighting as Onyxia, it could be clearly seen from the system scan that even with Alexstrasza's life's blessing, his combat level could no longer return to the past. His strength and maximum HP were permanently reduced. But in any case he was still a powerful ancient dragon. Even a broken ship has 3 nails, and even if he fell, it would not be a problem for him to become one of the strongest adult dragons. The only problem was that the system indicated that Veristaz's soul seemed to be damaged, and he had lost the ability to cast spells and use ultimate transformation. In other words, he could only be a melee dragon and mount after he recovered. Duque sighed. He could not expect every dragon to be like Onyxia, who did not have to worry about being taken back after being tamed, and was also very capable. The 4 major dragon clans now had a boss. If the boss did not agree, the young dragons could not change sides. As for young dragons, unless they were brought to the Alliance army on a large scale, they would not be of any use. Powerful ancient dragons were the backbone of the major dragon clans. They were very precious and they would not change sides for no reason. The only ones that Duque could trick were ancient dragons that had been in trouble. Veristaz's first reaction to Duque's shameless proposal to let him be the mount of Duque's woman was that he was dumbfounded. But on second thought, Duque already had Onyxia, who was stronger, and his subordination fell into Duque's hands. Was he going to let him be the second mount? At first, Veristaz was a little disheartened, but he did not know what to do now that he had lost his purpose of being a dragon. He could only nod. Thank you very much for giving me the life's blessing of my queen. I agree with your proposal, but before that, I have to go back to the Dragon Slumber Temple and report to Her Majesty. I belong to the Red Dragon Army, and all major matters in the army must be decided by Her Majesty. Duque nodded. Go. You'll only be a burden if you stay here. Say hello to Alexstrasza for me. Veristaz looked at his broken dragon claw that was starting to recover and smiled helplessly. Thank you for your understanding. But I'll just use life blessing for a while. I'll return it to you now. No need. Duque interrupted the red dragon. I was going to give up on this blessing. You're just in time. Duque was telling the truth. Alexstrasza's blessing was good, but it was no longer suitable for the current Duque. After obtaining the divinity of fire and wind, Duque was on the divine path, advancing towards a goal that belonged only to him. Perhaps in the future, Duque would have the characteristics of multiple elements, but Duque knew that it would definitely not include the life element of the nature element. Mages who used fire, ice, arcane spells, and wind and thunder to create destruction were destined to be incompatible with life mages who used healing spells. Transferring the blessing now was purely a favor at little cost. The red dragon hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. Actually, I know of a one-way path out of Blackwing's nest. You go first. Let's deal with Nefarian before we go out. After being reduced to a slave, the red dragon knew very well what kind of terrifying evil existed in Nefarian's nest. Valistaz was convinced of the mortal heroes like Duque who fought to eliminate evil. He no longer tried to persuade Duque. Instead, he lowered his head towards Duque and dragged his broken claws and wounded body out like a real cat. After dealing with the red dragon, Duque looked around and found that the situation was much better than he had imagined. Die. Die. Old Bull Kane continued to face Broodmother Lashlayer head-on. The thick totem pole had become even harder than a steel pillar under the blessing of the ancestor's soul. It met Broodmother Lashlayer's blade head-on without flinching. Both sides were originally on the same level of strength, but Old Bull had the blessing of Mount Hygel's equipment. In terms of absolute strength, he actually suppressed Broodmother Lashlayer. It seemed like a collision between Mars and Earth, but Broodmother Lashlayer was usually pushed back more often. After fighting against Archimonde and Ragnaros, Old Bull was even more adept at dealing with large monsters. After Duque gave Kane some pointers, Old Bull actually understood quite a lot. The huge double-headed blade slashed towards Old Bull's head. Old Bull moved the totem pole to the right and even raised the middle of the pole slightly to block the other end of the double-headed blade. Then he used his freed left hand to give Broodmother Lashlayer a ruthless punch. While Duque and the others were dealing with the fallen red dragon, Old Bull had clearly punched Broodmother Lashlayer in return. One of the Black Wing's horns had been forcefully broken by Old Bull. His right eye was also swollen like a bun. Duque was dumbfounded by this. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that this was indeed the case. In all fairness, Broodmother Lashlayer was not very strong. This guy was just a guard dog that ate the terrain. Without the powerful traps in the hall that he guarded, he was at most a strong elite monster with a bit more HP. If it was just Old Bull alone, he might have had a chance to be exhausted to death because his HP was not strong enough. But with Kalia things were completely different. Duque looked at Kalia, who was as beautiful as she was in the past. She swayed her graceful figure and waved her staff. She stood at an angle where she could see Kane, but Broodmother Lashlayer could not see her. She healed Kane rhythmically. Duque suddenly felt relieved. He walked over lightly and patted Kalia's butt, causing the Queen of Lordaeron to let out a coquettish cry. Watch Old Bull. I'll leave this third leader to you too. That's right, Kane is thick-skinned. If anything goes wrong you can abandon Kane and run first. That guy's legs are longer than yours so he can definitely run faster. Don't get hurt or else I'll take care of you tonight. Duque teased, causing Kalia's face to turn red. Kalia was still young and inexperienced. She was busy healing and did not dare to respond to her lover's teasing. But Old Bull blew his beard and glared. Hey, Duque, you bastard, I heard you. Duque did not even turn his head. If you can't deal with this guy called Broodmother Lashlayer, then it's my loss. He did humph, but Old Bull was elated. He could deal with an enemy leader alone. Seems like Duque thinks highly of me. Duque flashed over and appeared beside Magni, who was blocking the door. It should be said that Magni was indeed the #1 warrior in the Alliance. He was thick-skinned to begin with, and with Deity's Descent, which lasted more than 5 minutes, he was like a bug in the game. Unless it was a boss whose level was much higher than his, he could easily single-handedly fight for 8 to 10 minutes without any support. But without Duque around, everyone was fighting in a mess. Chapter 1205. Old 4 and Old 5 of the Black Wings were rather annoyed. Before Duque arrived, everyone had a disagreement as to which one to attack. Since it was a choice between the two, the other 7 randomly chose a black dragon to gang up on. They instinctively felt that the black dragon opposite them seemed to be able to stack fire damage. Hence, they used Magni's bulky body as cover and suddenly charged out to attack the black dragon that Sasha had casually marked with a hunter's mark, killing one before moving on to the next. That was the right logic. It was a pity that they weren't transmigrators, and didn't know that one of the 2 bosses had the special skill, Ebonok's Shadow, that could heal itself by attacking a specific target. As long as Ebonok was hit by this skill, the strange shadow curse would be able to heal the wounds on Ebonok's body. In the end, when Duque was dealing with Valestras, the 7 of them didn't manage to take any damage at all. Seeing this scene, Duque's forehead was full of black lines. After he rushed over, he patted Sasha's shoulder lightly. Sasha, don't bet with your sisters these days. Be careful or you might lose all your private stash. What? Sasha exclaimed. Duque raised his head and said loudly, change targets. Don't touch that dragon for now. Everyone can only attack the new target for 30 seconds at most before coming back to rest. They were all veterans and had seen all sorts of strange enemy skills. Although they didn't understand it every time, they wouldn't lose much as long as they did as Duque said. Seizing the opportunity when Old 4, Fillmore, pounced on him, everyone attacked together. A flash of swords and axes almost chopped off one of Fillmore's claws. Roar, the adult black dragon let out an angry roar. It swung its head and spat out a mouthful of shadow flames at the crowd. The experts who were already prepared shrunk back and hid behind the hole in the wall. Fillmore dashed towards the hole and was smashed back by Magni's hammer. The entire dragon spun in midair. The hero group against the two black dragons went on for a few rounds. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream came from behind. Duque turned around and saw Kane, who was covered in blood, leading a dragon head with a broken horn, striding toward him. Even though Kane was taking big strides, Duque realized that Kane was very sneaky. His thick hooves didn't make much sound and he was moving along the wall. The thoughts of experts always coincided with each other. "Shorty, don't be so stubborn the next time he comes," Duque shouted, and Magni immediately understood. As a main tank, Magni's biggest weakness was that he was too small. When he didn't activate Deity's Descent, it was very easy for the boss to rush over and kill the ranged attackers and healers at the back. Deity's Descent consumed a lot of stamina and energy. He could carry it, but it didn't mean that he didn't need to pay a price. Just as he was swinging the Balrog's hammer, Magni caught a glimpse of that sneaky old bull. In the next round, when Fillmore roared and charged at the hole he was guarding, the Shorty King played a vicious trick on this adult black dragon. Fillmore was shocked to find that the large silver shorty that had been blocking the hole and never retreating had suddenly disappeared. No, it didn't disappear but shrink. The previous countless charges ended with the shorty using his war hammer to fight them head-on. Who knew that the shorty would suddenly shrink back? Fillmore instinctively felt that something was wrong. He immediately spread his wings and flapped forward, trying to stop his momentum. Who knew that the moment the shorty shrank back to his original size, a shining paladin would suddenly rush out, waving a huge sword that looked like a sharp fork. What? Gasp. A turbulent flow suddenly appeared in the air. The strong tornado seriously interfered with the black dragon's movements, causing its sudden stop in the air to fail. Then a wretched Tauren suddenly jumped out from the hole, its huge and coarse fingers placed on the tip of Fillmore's flapping left wing. "Come on. Play with me on the ground." When Kane said this, there was a murderous look in his eyes. For some reason, Duque sounded like a weird uncle using a lollipop to trick a little girl to see a goldfish. Basically, the Alliance and Horde warriors all knew Titan's grip. The original intention was to allow warriors to wield two-handed weapons. This skill that could greatly increase a warrior's arm strength and grip strength could be learned with hard work. The specific increase depended on the individual's talent and race's talent. Obviously, the Tauren had the most insane increase. Kane was also the most insane among the Taurens. Duque could clearly hear the hollow bones on Fillmore's dragon wings cracking. "A woo!" Fillmore screamed and struggled with all his might. Being forcefully dragged over made him think of many bad things. Unfortunately, no matter how violent a little girl was, she couldn't withstand the strength of a real weird uncle. The old bull roared and forcefully pulled Fillmore down from the air with a movement similar to a shoulder throw, causing him to fall on the ground in an M shape. It wasn't that he wasn't reserved, it was just that the old bull was too violent. Fillmore, who was on all fours, almost instinctively struggled to get up. Who knew that the old bull would shamelessly raise his hands high up and viciously stab the thick totem pole into Fillmore's mouth that was filled with crisscrossed fangs, all the way to the depths of his throat. A woo! Fillmore let out a strange whimper, and the aftermath of the shadow flames flowed out from the corner of his mouth. The scary old bull was unmoved. He forcefully twisted Fillmore's head almost 180 degrees like a fried dough twist, and tried to twist it 360 degrees, as if he wanted to tie a slip knot on Fillmore's neck. Dragons weren't invertebrates. Although their necks were abnormally flexible like snakes, in reality because there was a limit to how much each cervical vertebra could rotate, a dragon couldn't truly twist its neck 360 degrees. Forcefully twisting it would only result in the cervical vertebra breaking and the trachea twisting. Fillmore desperately tried to turn his body around, using his huge body to resist the twisting of his neck. At the same time, he tried to extend his dragon claws, trying to grab Kane, who was holding his neck. In the end, he couldn't reach it. Originally, he shouldn't have lost to a Tauren in terms of strength. For some reason, the moment he passed through the hole, there seemed to be some mysterious power that greatly weakened him. Fillmore thought that it was an illusion, until he slashed at Ebonok and tried to use the shadow flames to save him. In the end, that damn dwarf became bigger again and jumped onto his body to be beaten up. Only then did he realize that something was really wrong. Chapter 1206. It was a terrifying power that struck the depths of his soul. Just like how ordinary creatures would tremble in the face of the terrifying firebird of a dragon, Fillmore could not resist the ruling will of the Black Dragon King. No. This willpower was even more terrifying than that of the current Black Dragon King, Nefarian. It made him tremble because it came from the ancestor of the Black Dragons, Deathwing, Nesario, who was superior to Nefarian. In the corner of his eyes, Filmer saw Duke, who was laughing coldly, raising a platinum biscuit that only had a fifth of its original size left in his hand. Nesario deceived the 4 major dragon clans into injecting souls and power to create that soul of the dragon. Not only did he eliminate the eyesore of the Burning Legion, but he also laid the foundation for the Black Dragons to run rampant for 10,000 years. This was a widely circulated story among the Black Dragons. Every Black Dragon had the motto of being cunning and shameless. When he saw the platinum biscuit, he suddenly understood what it was. Unfortunately, it was too late. With the totem pole stuck in his throat, he could not even speak. No. What? Ebenrock exclaimed. Duque did not do anything. He just lightly activated the power of the Wrath of the Dragon. This was already the cruelest killing blow for the 2 adult Black Dragons who had just been extremely arrogant. Wrath of the Dragon, Special Effect 3, Black Dragon Torture. As Nesario is the king of the Black Dragons, he is the ancestor of all Black Dragons. Activating this special effect can directly torture the soul of any Black Dragon descendant. The closer the distance, the purer the bloodline and the greater the power. With this special effect, all the pure-blooded dragons in Blackwing's nest were trash in front of Duque. Theon raised the Ashbringer high and slashed it down. Fillmore, whose neck had been twisted like a fried dough twist, was not in his best condition. Even his tight dragon scales had relaxed due to the soul punishment. It was as if he had stuck his neck into the guillotine. What the Ashbringer had to do was act as the guillotine for the beheading. Dragon blood splattered everywhere. Just like that, Blackwing Nest's 4th boss, Fillmore's enormous dragon head was separated from his body. On the other side, Ebenrock didn't last long either. With Magni's full force, the hand of Savras Balrog Ragnaros hammered down on his chest. Vanessa, who was at the side, could clearly hear the crisp sound of the giant dragon's ribs breaking. The golden-yellow flames penetrated Ebenrock's chest, and one could imagine that the giant dragon's heart had most likely turned into charcoal. Gavin Rad was still afraid that Ebenrock wouldn't die. The Thunder Fury Wind Chaser's blessed sword fiercely stabbed into Ebenrock's throat, and with a desperate twist, he almost chopped off Ebenrock's head. Looking at the frozen black dragon, Magni exclaimed, "Wait a minute! Don't chop off the dragon's head. After I purify this guy's soul, I'm going to put it in my spoils of war storage in Steel Stove Fort." You all have spoils of war. Do you think I don't? Gavin Rad was unhappy. At this moment, a furious dragon's roar came from the depths of Blackwing's nest, and a black dragon that wasn't much smaller in size than the previous 2 giant dragons quickly appeared in front of everyone. The 6th boss, Flammel, was a black dragon that didn't have any special skills other than knowing the Princeps's fury. After Sasha used focus shooting to suppress its berserk state, it was just a piece of cake for her. Huff. In the team of 10, almost everyone except Duque was panting heavily. It was very tiring, very tough, but also very happy. The result of the endless battles was that 6 of the 8 bosses of Blackwing's nest had been taken care of. The red dragon had been saved, and the rest were all lying dead in front of them. Gavin Rad stabbed the sharp tip of the wind sword into the ground, and like a sharp weapon stabbing into tofu, half of the sword's edge sank into the ground. Then he used it as a support and his entire back passed over. The lightning that lingered on the wind sword seemed to be a beneficial supplement to the magic in Gavin Rad's body. Anything else? So, come at me as well. Don't wait until I fall asleep from exhaustion before someone comes to touch me. I can't take that, Gavin Rad complained. Duque shook his head and smiled. In Blackwing's nest there aren't many existences that can threaten us. If the information Onyxia gave me is correct, there's only one big dog left, Chromagus and Nefarian. That's good. Old Cow laid on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. He didn't have Magni's deity's descent. Although his injuries could be healed by the stimulation of holy light, he couldn't replenish the blood that he had lost in a short period of time. After lying down for a while, he sat up, took out the food from his spatial bag and started eating and drinking. This was a sunken area without a door beside the hall where Veristas had been, but it had a good view, so it was used as a temporary resting place. Duque turned around. Theon, you're the least exhausted here. You'll be on duty for the first half of the night. Duque didn't have to worry about the Empress Dowager. Seeing him nod, Duque didn't say anything else. Vanessa, you'll be on duty for the second half of the night. Boo-hoo. Poor maidservant, you're destined to work hard. Duque ignored the maidservant's complaints and focused on collecting things. Not only did he collect the spoils of war left behind by the 6 bosses, but he also collected the hourglasses dropped by the minions. While Duque's small team was resting, Nefarian, who was in the hall at the top of the Blackrock Spire, was already restless. If Duque had gathered all the strong people in the world and attacked Blackwing's nest with all their might, then Nefarian might have sat on his throne with a playful attitude and waited for Duque's challenge. Duque had cheated. Of the 6 leaders, Duque used Dragon Soul Fragment against Razor Gore at the start, but he didn't use it against the other 5 leaders. Of course, in the eyes of the other dragons, this was the wrath of the dragon that the 4 major dragon races had towards the black dragons. 3 adult black dragons that were almost as powerful as the ancient dragons and a rather powerful dragon beast had been beaten to death by a mere 10 mortals. They hadn't even been able to use 40% of their strength. Nefarian had tricked the 4 major dragon races back then. Now the tables had turned. The 4 major dragon races were now tricking the black dragons. Nefarian's heart skipped a beat. Duque had probably used this when he subdued his sister Onyxia. This meant that even though he was the self-proclaimed king of the black dragons, he couldn't escape from Duque. In other words, as long as Duque could stand in front of him, his dream of becoming a dragon king would be over. Either he surrendered in humiliation and became a mount, or he would die in the Blackrock Spire without even using half of his strength. Escape? This option didn't exist for a proud king. Nefarian's face was livid. Just then, the sly and sinister voice that he was very familiar with appeared in his mind again. Chapter 1207. After Duque and the rest rested, they quickly advanced into Blackwing's nest. A brainless Blackwing goblin technician? 1 hit from the Firelord hammer. A tall dragon charging over with 2 swords? First use Ashbringer to cut off its legs, then use the Firelord hammer to hammer it to death. A large group of black dragon whelps flying over? The wind sword directly activated its special effect, causing a tornado that dragged the whelps to the ground. Finally the gangsters swarmed over. A lot of dragon scales and dragon skin. The more they advanced, the more uneasy Duque felt. This was too abnormal. If it was another enemy, perhaps Duque would think that the other party was shivering under the bed in the deepest part of the nest. It was Nefarian the Chinibu geek. In Duque's imagination, after Nefarian found out about the existence of Wrath of the Dragon, he would send his minions to attack the 10 of them at all costs to buy time. Nefarian did not make any additional arrangements. All of his defenses were the same as the Blackwing's nest that Duque had seen countless times. There must be a reason for this abnormality. Duque did not advance at high speed. Instead he slowed down. Until the place where Chromagus, who was supposed to be the 7th, was gone? 3 natures of the door god, time and ignite. This phrase was regarded as a nightmarish legend among the players in the past, and it described how disgusting this place was. The dragon of the nature element, in addition to the disgusting time-lapse skill of Oil 7, had left a deep impression on Duque. If they did not get wiped out 8 or 10 times, they would not be able to say that they had conquered Blackwing's nest. Now that the most disgusting boss in the entire Blackwing's nest besides Nefarian and the little red dragon had disappeared for no reason, it was impossible for Duque not to be alarmed. Most likely that boastful black dragon is afraid of us dragon slayers. Cain patted his chest and laughed. His laughter resonated with everyone. Powerful prey was always a man's most boastful achievement. Even a holy knight like Gavin Rad, who was supposed to be humble in theory, couldn't help but chop off a dragon's head and stuff it into his dimensional bag, much less the 2 chiefs and Magni. The team was brimming with an atmosphere of overconfidence. Duque was keenly aware of this and tried to dissuade everyone, but all he got was a verbal warning to be careful. Cain carried the totem pole and walked in front, while Grum tied his bloodhowl to his back. As the rear guard, Gavin Rad carried his wind sword and whistled frivolously as he followed them. Wrath of the Colossal Dragon was a great counter to the Black Dragon race. It was so big that the heroes were a little off guard. If this was in an anime, it would be a death flag. Duque said something that no one else understood. When Duque and his party crossed the area where Chromagus was, they noticed that the scenery in front of them had changed. Duque's expression suddenly changed. The original style of Blackwing's nest was rather bright. Even the lower levels, which were dimly lit, were filled with torches. After passing through this area, the scenery around them suddenly became scarlet. If it was any other situation, Duque might have thought that Nefarian had a brain cramp and wanted to change the decorations to change his mood. But was this the time for decorations? Furthermore, this wasn't decorations at all. The aura of death was so thick that it was almost tangible. Even though they were walking on the floor and looking at the blood-red background, everyone could clearly feel the traces of Nefarian's terrifying willpower. The group of experts immediately put away their carefree attitude, and their faces were filled with seriousness. Magni's loud voice was the first to ring out, "Hey, Duque, is this guy really Nefarian? Didn't you say that this guy's level isn't that much lower than Onyxia's? Why do I feel like Big Brother is a few levels stronger than Little Sister?" The group advanced in a tight formation. They should have reached the top level of the Blackrock Spire very quickly, but now there was an additional corridor of blood. On both sides of the 20-meter-wide corridor were pools of blood that emitted a disgusting smell. Above the pools of blood were all kinds of monster specimens. They were sealed in huge transparent glass-like containers. Some of them had already lost their lives, while others were slapping the walls that were strengthened by magic in vain, wailing in despair. Duque could recognize some of them. For example, the giant magma worms that came from the molten core. There were also some that he couldn't recognize at all. There were also some that seemed to be stitched together from a human and a dragonoid, similar to the abominations of the Scourge army. The only difference was that they were still alive. Duque's hand was suddenly held by a small trembling hand. It was Kalia. This queen of Lordaeron, who had been raised as a flower in a greenhouse until she was 18 years old and had roamed for 10 years. She had only recently stepped onto the path of facing strong enemies. Now it was as if all her battle experience had been washed away, and she had become a weak girl who couldn't even fight a chicken. Indeed, such a disgusting thing was a little too much for a girl to bear. Duque could only pat Kalia's hand gently and comfort her. Duque knew what Kalia wanted to ask. Things are a little beyond my imagination. Brothers, it's impossible to retreat. He has already found us. Prepare to fight with your lives. Half an hour's journey wasn't long. Duque and the others quickly arrived at a sealed blood hall the size of 2 football fields. Pools of blood flowed down the walls on both sides of the hall, flowing into what seemed to be blood troughs on both sides of the hall. Was that caused by Nefarian's power? Or was it the accumulated blood from killing many creatures for scientific research? No one knew. Everyone's eyes were locked on the man sitting on the throne of blood. "Ah, I thought you had even lost the courage to come here." The bearded man held his chin and spoke in a seemingly provocative but calm tone. Duque stepped out from the crowd and looked up at the mysterious man's eyes. "Should I call you Victor Nefarios? Or Nefarian?" The man smiled. "The name I use when I'm in human form is just a code. I still hope that you can call me Nefarian. The real king of the Black Dragons, Nefarian of the Apocalypse." Duque's heart almost stopped beating at this moment. Although Duque already had a hunch after seeing the previous scene, who knew that after hearing it from the other party, the shock still set off a storm in Duque's heart. Duque only wanted to say that he bought a watch last year. Chapter 1208. Nefarian's Blackwing Nest and Nefarian's Apocalypse, S. Blackwing Blood Ring. These two combinations might seem a little different, but the difference between them was like heaven and earth. In the game, one was a level 60 instance dungeon, while the other was a level 85 instance dungeon. Duque's average equipment for Mount Hyjal was not even at the entry level. If Nefarian had really transformed into Nefarian's Apocalypse, which was supposed to appear 10 years later, then there would be no need to fight. They could just surrender. Duque's hands were trembling, and a large amount of data was pouring down on his retina. The system's warning tone was beeping non-stop, and his eyes were filled with crimson warning words. Warning. An unknown protective shield has appeared on the humanoid Nefarian. According to calculations, there is an 21% chance that he will be immune to the power of Wrath of the Dragon. Warning. Warning. Nefarian's Apocalypse matches the level 85 boss in the host's memory by 11%. If it really is the boss, the host has a 99% chance of being wiped out. It is strongly recommended that the host avoid it. At the very least, leave its territory and fight for a chance of resurrection. Duke sucked in a breath of cold air and his face turned green, but he knew he could not retreat. At this moment, Duque's mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. This was not a game. If the team was wiped out, the essence of the alliance would be gone. Not to mention that there were still 3 women here. He could resurrect, but what about them? Calm down. Duque. Calm down. How could this happen? Nefarian's sudden increase in strength was undoubtedly the work of Enzos. The problem was, would Enzos die so easily? Why would he level up Nefarian for free? This was not an increase of 10% or 20%. It was an increase of 3 levels, and his strength had multiplied several times in one go. Could it be that during the cataclysm, several ancient gods had placed their bets on Nethario, but now that Nethario had been killed, they placed their bets on Nefarian? But that shouldn't be happening now. According to history, the imprisoned ancient god Si-Thun would not be able to restrain himself and would be the first to jump out and court death. As the first ancient god to go into battle, Si-Thun's performance was remarkable, but it was precisely because of Si-Thun's failure that En-Zoth and the other ancient gods bet on Deathwing Nesario to set off the cataclysm. Duque smelled a strong conspiracy. But the best actor was still the best actor. On the surface, Duque was cold and arrogant. He pointed his right hand at the humanoid black dragon. Nefarian, do you really think you're something? Don't forget. How did your father die? Your sister is still under my crotch as a mount. Yes, Duke's words were reasonable and his pretentiousness was convincing. Even Nefarian believed it, but Duque still didn't notice the difference. What he didn't know was that Duque had stretched out 2 fingers. The pupils of Duque's comrades suddenly shrank. Pointing a finger at the enemy was a signal they had agreed upon before entering Blackwing's nest. If only one finger was raised, then he would directly attack him without any discussion, and he could do whatever he wanted. If the index and middle fingers were pointed together, then it would be a big deal. It meant that Duque estimated that the opponent's strength was far greater than his own, and he needed to use a big move to stall for time. Unconsciously, everyone tightened their grip on the weapons in their hands. Nefarian suddenly became interested. If it was the him from before, he would probably be feeling guilty now. But now, he decided to play a trick on this human who had brought continuous disasters and failures to the Black Dragon race. He hated Alexstrasza and the 4 colored dragons of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. He also hated Duke Marcus, who played a dishonorable but incomparably important role in the 2 ambushes. Directly capturing Duque and forcing Duque to call his sister was too easy for Duque. Interesting. I'll let you have a good taste of what despair is. Nefarian slapped the armrest of the throne. Suddenly, a huge iron gate fell on the gate that Duque and the others came from, blocking their way out. What a good way to close the gate and release the dogs. As Duque expected, from the 2 doors that suddenly opened on the left and right, a large group of dragon beasts suddenly rushed out of the darkness. There were only 2 colors, red and blue. Duque's eyes immediately narrowed into a line. Leave it to me. Duque's words made everyone who was ready to go forward stop in their tracks. Duque snorted coldly, and the magic circuit in his body was activated to the extreme in an instant. He did not know how long it had been since he had seen Duque attack like this. Even when he was beating up Ragnaros, Duque only concentrated his magic and carried out a torrent of firepower in stages. There were 256 hands of magic on each side, and what they set off was a magic storm that seemed to divide the world into 2 halves. The left side was ice and the right side was fire. The icicles as thick as a human arm easily pierced through the bodies of the red dragon beasts and sent them flying. They cut off their limbs in midair, and even froze their bodies and splattered flesh in midair before they fell to the ground. The fireball the size of a water tank easily blew up the bodies of the blue dragon beasts, turning them into charcoal. They did not even rush out a few steps before they exploded in midair, and their charred limbs dissipated with the wind. The number of people who came out, the number of people who died. Duque raised his chin slightly, and with a look of contempt on his face, he hooked his finger at Nefarian. Come down. Why don't you let us wait for you for a year and a half, and let you make more new toys before coming down? Gotcha. Nefarian lost his composure and easily crushed the golden armrests on both sides of his throne. He suddenly stood up. Duke Marcus, you will regret provoking me. Under the gaze of all the strong people, Nefarian's human body began to rapidly expand. From a 2-meter-tall human, he suddenly became a terrifying dragon with a body length of more than 50 meters. Everything was within everyone's expectations. After all, they were supposed to fight the Black Dragon King. Wait. This color? Boss, are you sure he's Onyxia's brother? Gavin Rat asked softly. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. The scene in front of him made Duque feel extremely strange. If this was the original Nefarian, then he would undoubtedly be a standard black dragon. Black scales, white horns with a yellowish hue, orange-red lines between the scales, and a string of yellow barbs along his spine. Now, the overall color of Nefarian in everyone's eyes was slightly strange. Not only were his scales purple, but there was also a faint aura of death, giving off the feeling that he was a little like an undead but also a little different. This was because from his mouth, there was still the fishy smell of a living creature. What the hell is going on? At this moment, the system sent new data to Duque's retinas. Chapter 1209. Obtaining the enemy's data by scanning was an instinct that Duque had developed after his transmigration. The system genie's feedback gave Duque a headache, but at the same time he saw some hope. The first second, warning. The enemy's level is too high. Please escape as soon as possible. The next second, injecting Blackwing's Nest boss Nefarian's data. Data conflict. Duque suddenly realized that the color of Nefarian's dragon scales would change from time to time. Sometimes it would be purple and sometimes it would be black. Unfortunately, the timing of the change was not easy to grasp due to the lack of data. System, record the pattern of Nefarian's dragon scales color change, and calculate its period as soon as possible. If I'm not wrong, Nefarian's current power is not complete. When his power temporarily drops to the level of Blackwing's Nest, it will be an opportunity. Just as Duque was about to reply to Gavin Rad, Nefarian had already charged over. At this moment his dragon scales were purplish-blue. Deity's descent. Duque shouted hurriedly. Magni immediately understood and his body rapidly enlarged. He raised the Balrog hammer high and slammed it against Nefarian's dragon claw. Bam! It was a clash of power without any technique. The winner was Nefarian, whose power had skyrocketed. The onlookers could clearly see that Magni's enlarged silver body was being crushed like a pillar. Although he wasn't crushed into a biscuit, he was almost there. Nefarian clearly realized that he couldn't kill this strong dwarf warrior in one hit. He suddenly extended his dragon head and bit at Kalia, who was at the back. Don't ignore me. The Oxhead chief strode forward, and the totem pole that was as thick as the pillar of a large house slammed down. Just the ear-piercing sound of it breaking through the air was very frightening. Kane missed. As if he had expected Kane, who was the number 2 tank, to come up, his snake-like dragon neck tilted at the last moment and dodged the attack. At this moment, the final move of the giant dragon's most terrifying close combat combo came. Nefarian's huge body suddenly turned horizontally, and his dragon tail that was more than 20 meters long smashed into the back row like a huge meteor hammer. Ha! Gavin Rad charged forward with the wind sword in his hand. He was prepared to face Nefarian's Firebird head-on. Unfortunately, he missed. The tail was like a rake with 6 huge bone spikes. It drew a strange wavy arc in front of Gavin Rad, quickly and gracefully dodging the paladin's attack, and mysteriously swept towards the middle row of Duque's team. That was where the close combat team was located. Ah! Vanessa cried out in surprise. She used her high agility to perform a beautiful backflip, narrowly dodging the attack. However, the other 2 in heavy armor were not so easy to dodge. Theon brandished Ashbringer, and a long thin beam of holy light shot towards the dragon's tail. Nefarian chose to take it head-on, but at the last moment he smashed his tail towards Grom. Oomph! Grom leapt into the air. No one had foreseen that something unexpected would happen. Suddenly, Grom's entire body froze in the air, as if he was a picture that had been captured by a camera. His posture as he leapt, his mouth opened so wide that his fangs could be seen, and his bulging muscles, everything stopped. Duque suddenly reacted and yelled, "Hourglass!" Hourglass? What hourglass? Grom froze for half a second before he reacted. This was the deal he had with OL-7. Only OL-7's big dog, Chromagus, could make someone suddenly freeze in the air. Caught off guard, and because he was not mentally prepared, Grom threw the hourglass that could get him out of trouble into the deepest part of his bag. Suddenly, 2 huge hands of magic appeared beside him, trying to drag him to the side. Unfortunately, it was too late. Nefarian had already bitten him. Arg! Blood splattered everywhere. Under everyone's gaze, Nefarian succeeded in his forceful attack and bit off a small part of Grom's body. Lord Howl's entire left arm, left shoulder, and a part of his left chest were all bitten off. His companions could even see Lord Howl's still moving lungs through the bloody wounds. Grom screamed in agony as he fell from the sky, forming a stark contrast with Nefarian's ferocious eyes. In the first round, one of Duque's main forces had lost the ability to fight. Save him. Almost at the same time as Duque's scream, several holy flashes and rapid healing spells were cast. However, unless it was a holy knight who sacrificed all his mana and energy to cast holy healing, the healing effect of holy light on large body parts was rather limited. Not to mention, Duque could already see that a large part of Grom's soul had been devoured in that instant. The loss of the soul was the most terrifying. Without the soul as a foundation, the body would not treat the missing part as a part of the body. This meant that even if Grom had the regenerative ability of a troll, he would not be able to regrow his left arm. What happened next confirmed Duque's judgment. Even with several beams of holy light, everyone was shocked to see that only the left part of Grom's chest had begun to heal, and there were no signs of a new limb growing out. Grom rolled on the ground in pain, but he was extremely stubborn. Even when he bit his lips until they were full of blood, he did not let out a single scream. Eee. Nefarian actually retreated after his successful attack. He flapped his wings, instantly stirring up a gust of wind, and his entire dragon flew into the air. Duque noticed that Nefarian's dragon scales had turned black, and the veins between the scales had turned red again. Not only Nefarian but even Chromagus, who was supposed to be a powerhouse in close combat, seemed to be terrified. He hid far away in a corner of the blood hall, while a large group of dragons swarmed over. They wanted to use their own blood and lives to exchange for precious time for their boss to catch his breath. Shameless. Sasha fired again and again. Duque and Elugia also kept firing. Unfortunately, they first had to deal with the army of dragons that were madly charging at them. Only then could they shoot the extra attacks at Nefarian, who was moving around in the air. The result was that the damage dealt to Nefarian was too low. Gavin, Rad and Tyrion tried to use their divine artifacts to attack from afar, but the effect was not good. Nefarian just kept moving around, focusing on dodging the attacks from the divine artifacts while taking on the rest. Everyone's pupils suddenly shrank. Their own weakness had been found out, which was that they had too many melee professionals and too few ranged attackers. About a minute later, Nefarian's dragon scales turned purple again. It was the triple dragon combo and doggies. Time elapse. Again. This time, Gavin Rad's Mount Hygel level plate armor was completely destroyed. Chapter 12:10. In this day and age, paladin heroes were all capable of fighting, tanking and healing. Although Gavin Rad was one of the weakest of the 5 Silver Sages, his equipment could be said to be extravagant. He would definitely have a share of paladin equipment in every battle. Along the way, he had accumulated a wealth of battle experience. Even so, he still fell into Nefarian's trap. Nefarian's attack and defense attributes were greatly increased in the purple scale state. Coupled with Chromagus' most powerful and disgusting skill, time lapse, there was no way to defeat Nefarian. If Gavin Rad had not cast the Divine Shield spell that granted him 12 seconds of invincibility, Gavin Rad would have been a corpse. Only half of Gavin Rad's armor remained. There were 3 deep scratches on the back half of his armor, and even his undershirt could be seen. In a fit of rage, Gavin Rad tore off his wobbly breastplate. He now had gauntlets, leg guards, pauldrons and a belt, but no armor. It looked ridiculous. Boss. Gavin Rad shouted. Duque frowned deeply. Suddenly he made a decision. Everyone focus fire on Chromagus. Nefarian could fly, but he couldn't let this 2-headed molten hound do the same, right? However, killing Chromagus was not an easy task. Without Nefarian, Chromagus, who looked like a molten hound, could only die with a grievance in front of Duke and his men who were prepared for it. However, there was a black dragon king in the sky that was even more powerful than Nefarian. Without enough restraint, if Nefarian were to charge at them, they would still be wiped out. But Grom? Tyrion wanted to say something but stopped. If they attacked with all their might, it would be impossible to maintain the current all-around defensive formation. Then, the injured in the formation would definitely be exposed. Don't worry about me. There are no orcs in the horde who are afraid of death. Grom gripped Bloodhowl tightly in his right hand and stood up. He was old. He was injured. He was no longer the horde's god of war that his enemies feared. But his courage, his bravery, made it impossible for the bystanders not to be moved. A general dying in battle. A warrior dying in battle. Perhaps this was the best ending for a brave orc who had fought for his entire life. All right. Cain let out a loud cheer. He smashed away a few dragons with his staff to clear a path for them. You guys go. Leave the rear guard to me and Sasha. With that, Duque actually hugged Sasha from behind. Duque. Suddenly having Duque's abdomen pressed against her perky but Sasha panicked. Even though they had been husband and wife for so many years on the battlefield at a time like this, Sasha was very embarrassed. Idiot, don't think too much. Duque spat at Sasha. The next moment, Duque's left hand held onto Sasha's left hand, and his right hand held onto her right arm. His evolved divine artifact longsword suddenly appeared on Sasha's bowstring. This is. Sasha was stunned. Around him, Duque's hand of magic was blasting wave after wave of dragons into smithereens. In the distance, the 8 of them had already reached Chromagus. Only Duque and Sasha were left at the back of the group. Sasha did not understand what it meant to put such a heavy sword on the bowstring. Even with the power of her Phoenix's Son's Fury longbow, there was no way she could shoot such a heavy sword. Trust me. If I say this sword is an arrow, then it is an arrow. Duque whispered into Sasha's ear. The feeling of his breath tickled Sasha's sensitive ears. Of course, Sasha had absolute trust in Duque. All right. If you say it's an arrow, then it is. Sasha pulled the bowstring and held onto what should be a sword with her right hand. What surprised her the most was that when she pulled the bowstring, the sword suddenly became much lighter. The spiral-shaped blade actually became even more slender as she pulled it, and its weight seemed to have disappeared. No, it became as heavy as her most commonly used arrow. Not a bit more, not a bit less. Sasha could not understand this change at all. However, this did not stop her from feeling the terrifying power of wind and fire on the arrow. Duque sighed in his heart. Damn it, he suddenly understood why his personal divine weapon was called Duque's Integrity. The system wrote, "Host, you have activated the mysterious effect X of the artifact, Duke's Moral Integrity. You can duplicate your artifact infinitely and change its form. However, in order for it to have power, you need to inject a special power into it, such as the fire element with divinity, the wind element, or the magic element with your will." Warning. After injecting the host's humanity will decrease accordingly. If the target resists the host's power or will, the host has an 80% chance of retrieving the host's humanity from the atmosphere. Feelings were meant to throw away one's moral integrity. At this moment, Duque was crying in his heart. Sasha, aim and shoot. I'll make the arrow. Okay. The valiant and heroic female ranger hero had no idea what kind of price she had to pay for every arrow she shot out for the sake of her lover. She only knew that she had to do her job well. In terms of long-range attacks, Sasha was much more talented than the few close combat veterans. Her ability to predict was godlike. She could predict how Nefarian would fly, what dodges he would make, and even whether there was a chance for him to stop in the air. Previously, she could not threaten Nefarian because her attack power was too low. Now, with Duque's infinitely duplicated spiral-shaped arrows, she became the most terrifying cannon in an instant. Swoosh, 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 the terrifying sound of wind breaking could be heard. The arrows that could be completely ignored suddenly became killing machines. Before this, no matter how tricky Sasha's arrows were, as long as they were not direct shots, they would not be able to penetrate Nefarian's dragon scales. At most, they would pierce the dragon's skin but not its muscles. But now it was completely different. Attacks that contained some divinity were Nefarian's greatest weakness. At the end of the day, the power that he had now was only forcefully stimulated by Enzo's dark divinity. If Nefarian's divinity was strong enough, he could use it to defend against this interference. However, although he was born as a demigod, he did not know how to use this power. In the end, it was Duque's divinity that interfered with Enzo's divinity, causing his body to become even more unstable. Arg? Nefarian was furious. Contrary to his usual behavior, he switched to attacking Duque first. In the end, Duque opened more than 10 teleportation portals in the narrow space, and brought Sasha through these portals. Chapter 12:11. If Nefarian was still the Black Dragon King, Duque wouldn't have dared to teleport. When a single magical element was concentrated to a certain extent, it would instinctively reject the existence of other elements. In Blackwing's nest, which was filled with shadow elements, Duque couldn't even teleport or receive magical messages. Now Nefarian had accepted Enzo's divine power, which didn't belong to him. Instead, it interfered with Nefarian's absolute control over space. Although Duque couldn't break the spatial barrier to connect to the outside world, he could make use of Nefarian's weakness to create a few holes in the spatial rift for him and Sasha to pass through. Duque and Sasha's joint attack was very fierce. The arrows that were shot were high and low. Every time they fluttered and swayed, Nefarian felt like he was trapped by the arrows and unable to escape. It wasn't to the point of fear, but with his huge body, it was impossible for him to escape or dodge. The only result was that he was hit. Hit again. Nefarian had wanted to ignore Duque and Sasha and directly attack the small team of 8. After all, 100 meters was a distance that the Black Dragon King could cross in the blink of an eye. However, Duque told Nefarian with the hard truth that he shouldn't even think about it. Scram. As Nefarian rapidly approached, Duke's eyes, which had been half closed, suddenly opened when the black dragon's figure approached. His left eye burned with blazing flames, while his right eye flashed with dazzling lightning. Along with the vibration of the bowstring, an arrow that was a mixture of fire, wind, and lightning easily traversed 50 meters of the void as if it was teleported. It was like a sharp sword piercing towards Nefarian, turning the sword into an arrow and then turning the arrow back into a sword. Duke's move caught Nefarian off guard. Even though the Black Dragon King dodged the attack, the spiral conical divine blade projection still managed to leave a hole in his lower abdomen. The divine blade projection passed through his abdomen diagonally, and left a large hole in the black dragon's left bat wing. Ah! This time Nefarian panicked. He was really panicking. He didn't expect Duke to be able to injure him when his attack, defense, and speed had been greatly enhanced. To a demigod-level black dragon with an incomparably tenacious life force, this injury would at most be a minor injury. However, an injury was still an injury. The heavens had bestowed upon him a powerful defensive ability, but at the same time, it had ruthlessly cut off his recovery ability. Although it was just a small wound, it would take at least 10 years to completely heal without any external help. You. How dare you hurt me? Nefarian screamed in amusement. Duke bared his teeth. If it weren't for Onyxia's surrender, I would have hung the heads of your family of 3 on the Wormrest shrine. Bastard, Duke blinked. Should he say? Did the Black Dragon clan walk the path of nobility? How could they scold others so elegantly? Back and forth it was just the same few sentences. Sigh. It really couldn't compare to the national quintessence of the Celestial Empire. He would spit out 18 words for 3 seconds at a time, and there were no repetitions. Cough cough. Speaking of which, Duke's side had effectively restrained Nefarian, and he had also surrounded the various dragon beasts. The morale of the small team of 8 was immediately boosted. Especially Lord Howl. In order to prove that he wasn't an injured person, not a burden, Lord Howl was practically hacking at the big dog Chromagus with all his might. If it weren't for Duke giving Lord Howl an illusion, making the big dog look like there were 2 Magunis holding axes and looking at it, and also not helping Lord Howl change into an illusion, the big dog would probably have made Lord Howl its primary target and chased him all over the street. At this time, Duke's strength and all-roundness were on full display. A large number of illusions ran all over the street, and each illusion had a certain amount of magical energy and even holy light. Gavinrad was tongue-tied as he watched 3 Gavinrads, hacking at the dragon beasts with their wind swords, and then they were all killed by the dragon beasts. Hey, I'm not that weak. Shut up. Do you want all the monsters to know that this is your real body and then cut your ass off? Duke's angry scolding shut Gavinrad up on the spot. Although Chromagus, time-lapse, was effective everywhere and could freeze a person at any time, there were too many targets, and the big dog was starting to feel a little powerless, especially when it looked and sensed that there were now hundreds of mortal heroes running around it. A divine artifact was a divine artifact. When the number and quality of divine artifacts accumulated to a certain level, it would become a qualitative change. It was true that Chromagus was fully armed. Its armor was made of the toughest source substance of this era, and ordinary epic weapons would be deflected in a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, it had encountered a group of unreasonable fellows. Wah! Under the avatar state, the enlarged Magni leaped high into the air. His body weighed more than a ton, and with the acceleration of gravity, Savra's Balrog Ragnaro's hand burst out with a blazing light like the sun, and like a falling mountain, it smashed into one of Chromagus's heads. The direct result of this full-force blow was that the big dog's left head almost immediately exploded, like a rotten watermelon that had been smashed with a stick. The big dog tried to retreat in pain, but at this moment, Theon suddenly took 3 steps forward, and Ashbringer condensed an even more violent sea of holy light. The next moment, all the golden light in the sea of holy light poured into the big dog's broken head. Awoo! The golden light spread throughout the big dog's body. Since they were taking advantage of its weakness to kill it, of course they would not leave Lord Howl and Gavinrad out. The 2 of them worked together to create a huge wound on the big dog's right hind leg. Then, the Minotaur chief leaped high into the air and stabbed a totem pole directly into the huge wound. As if stirring, it began digging in the wound. Awoo! The remaining head of Chromagus kept howling. Its howls were also urging its master to work harder. Nefarian also wanted to, but his side was in more trouble. This was because various holy wills were piercing into his soul through the arrows. God says, "Let there be light. The earth shall heal the scars. Mother Moon is watching you. The wills of Alansis Fail, Mediv and Elun, the goddess of the moon, were constantly invading Nefarian's spiritual world. Originally, Nefarian only needed to suppress his own consciousness and let Enzatha's will and power better fuse into his body. Now he had to work hard to separate the entangled wills and choose the most suitable power for himself to maintain his strength. Nefarian's situation was not good. Chapter 12:12. Of course, Duque wasn't much better off. Hey, are you done? I can't hold on much longer. Duque shouted with the whisper of the wind. What's going on? I don't feel your magic power dropping. Thean said in surprise. No. Duque, there's definitely something wrong. Sasha shouted. With Duque's godly sword poking her from behind, Sasha's body felt a little weak. Duque didn't know how to explain it. Now, every time Sasha knocked an arrow and shot, Sasha was having a good time. It was tough on Duque. Moral integrity, throw it out. Pick it up. Throw it out again. Pick it up again. Throw it out, huh? Do I have moral integrity? Nefarian, who had been injected with a large amount of goodwill, began to doubt his life. Wasn't Duque also doubting his life? The system kept warning. 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 The host's moral integrity has fallen to a critical level. Please do not use Duque's moral integrity again, or else you might trigger the descent of the 7 deadly sins. Fortunately, after so long, Duque's willpower had improved greatly. Kalia also realized that something was wrong and hurried over to inject holy light into Duque's mind. Duque, look into my eyes. Think of the happy times we had together. Kalia gazed at Duque with her clear and pure eyes. Who knew? Duque put on a fake smile. His crooked eyes made it obvious that he was thinking of the wrong thing. Ah. Duque suddenly realized that his left and right waist had been attacked at the same time. It was Sasha and Kalia. He felt pain and then his mind fell into a trance again. In the distance, Nefarian fell head first, struggling and rolling on the ground. This was because what Duque had shot into the black dragon's body was not only the will of the 3 good ones, but also a prophetic dream. In the dream world, Nefarian was harvested again and again. Not only in Blackwing's nest, but also in Blackwing's blood ring, he was also defeated again and again. The dragon head was put on display in Stormwind City, Steel Forge, Dalagen, and Lordaeron. The sorrow of being whipped after death and the despair of his soul falling into the abyss filled Nefarian's heart. Now that Nefarian and Duque had both fallen into mental confusion, the strongest fighters on both sides were temporarily eliminated from the battle. Originally, Magni and the others were prepared to lose the cover of Duque's magic. However, the hand of magic in the air continued to fire, accurately and effectively eliminating the dragons that were rushing out. Duque's multicasting mechanism is different from ordinary wizards. Perhaps this is why he is a Breaking Dawn wizard of all elements, while we are still unable to break through our own limits, Elugia explained. Forget it. Don't worry about it. Kill the big dog first. The macho men attacked with all their might. The dazzling special effects of their weapons flashed with terrifying light. Go. Magni took the lead. He raised his Balrog hammer and began to charge at high speed. This time he aimed at the big dog's remaining head. Oh whoa. Chromagus used his skill to ignite Magni. Unfortunately, under the effect of deity's descent, the dwarf king's skin was as thick as a city wall. No matter how much the flames on his body crackled, they did not do much damage to him. The big dog saw the flaming hammer rapidly expanding in its sight. It instinctively shrank back, but it was too big and too slow. The Tauren beside it ruthlessly smacked its totem pole. This made the big dog's head feel as if it had delivered itself to the door and installed the Balrog hammer on it. The flames of the Balrog hammer, the lightning of the wind sword, the golden flames of the Ashbringer, the radiance of the blood howl. Finally, while Duque and Nefarian were down, the group eliminated all of Nefarian's fighters in one go. Come on. Slay the dragon. Gavinrad yelled as he activated the Dragon Slayer enchantment on his sword. This enchantment specifically targeted dragons could significantly increase the damage dealt to Nefarian. Just as the others were about to charge at Nefarian, an evil will descended upon them. Hee hee. Enzatha's cold laughter and low voice haunted everyone's mind like a nightmare, making them dizzy. Humble, honest, compassionate, brave, just. When faced with a test of willpower, the Holy Knights were always the first to pass the test. Tyrion and Gavinrad roared, allowing the holy light on their bodies to benefit their companions. Soon the 3 strong male warriors woke up, followed by Elucia, Sasha, Kalia, Vanessa, and Duque. No one expected N'Zatha's will to disappear as quickly as it came. It was as if he had just appeared for fun, disappearing not long after. In front of them, an event that no one expected and had never appeared in the original history happened. Nefarian's huge dragon body disappeared, and was replaced by the human form of Victor Nefarios. At this moment, Duque was dumbfounded. No matter which part of history it was, there was no record of Nefarian fighting in human form. Should he say that he was indeed the butterfly that destroyed history? Nefarian? No, he should be called Victor now. However, Duque still preferred to call him Nefarian. Nifa took out a huge two-handed sword from the void. It was a sword with two dark red dragon heads as the handle, and a strange dark red trapezoidal blade as the body. Duque would recognize it even if he turned into ashes. Ashkandi, Sword of the Brotherhood. Back in the game, countless players fought over this eye-catching two-handed sword. The demonic red light, the cool dragon patterns, and the mysterious runes were all sought after by the players. The two capital letters, AL, were engraved on the hilt of the sword, which added to the imagination of the sword's origin. Some said that it was Anduin Lothar's backup weapon, while others said that it came from the Brotherhood of the Iron and Horse. It was impossible to verify the details. However, there was one thing that was often mentioned, and that was, once AL is out, there are no more brothers. Nefarian, who had turned back into human form, stood up with the sword of the Brotherhood. He seemed abnormal. The power of the shadow was rising from his body, but there was also the evil glow of the ancient gods. You're finished, mortals. You can't kill me. Otherwise, your world will face the most hopeless destruction. Nefarian said nonsensically. This made Duque and the others frown. Duque sneered, "Oh? Then we should stretch out our necks and let you kill us?" "Yes, exactly. This is the final fate that mortals like you should face." Nefarian held the huge two-handed sword with one hand, and his entire body swayed. It seemed that he would self-destruct soon without Duque's help. Chapter 12-13. While I still have time. Kill him in one go. Magni roared. Magni's, deity's descent, was useful, but it had a time limit. Even though he was the number one dwarf, Duque had calculated that he could only maintain deity's descent for 5 minutes at most. Why did it seem like he could maintain it for at least 10 minutes each time? Magni was more sneaky than the average dwarf. This talented dwarf warrior had the ability to adjust his own defense like he was breathing. When he wanted to harden his body, he would use all his strength. When he wanted to catch his breath, he would secretly cut off the defense in his silver shell. This meant that while he was beating up his enemies, his deity's descent was in standby mode. Of course, Duque wouldn't say it out loud. Who would have thought? The crimson sword flashed and 2 pillars of blood shot up into the sky. Everyone who was maintaining their formation was so shocked that their pupils constricted. The left side of Magni's waist was slashed by the great sword of the Brotherhood, and a wound large enough to hold a baby's fist in. Under his silver skin and armor, this bright red wound was extremely glaring. Magni wasn't the worst off. No one expected that Old Bull, who was following closely behind Magni, would have his leg cut off in an instant. His entire right leg remained where it was, while Kane's burly body was sent flying more than 10 meters away. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop. Kane couldn't help but let out a cry that sounded like a bull's, and it was hard to tell if it was a cry of a human or beast. If it wasn't for Theon, who was the third in line, who was more skilled in martial arts and had blocked the great sword of the Brotherhood, the team might have lost 3 vanguards in an instant. Nefarian's short hair fluttered as he moved rapidly, and his movements were very elegant. He spun 360 degrees like a ghost, and actually crossed at least 5 meters, passing Lord Howl in the middle, and arrived at the center of Duque's team. He slashed horizontally again with great force, and the huge blade enveloped Duque, Elucia, Kalia, and Sasha. Dang! The crisp sound of metal clashing rang out. It turned out that Vanessa had activated Swift Run at some point in time. 2 short but dangerous daggers slashed down from above and hit the sword in a cross. If Nefarian was just a human, his attack would have been able to deflect the Brotherhood's sword. Unfortunately, he wasn't. The power of a giant dragon was simply incalculable to mortals. Without any hesitation, Nefarian, who had transformed into Victor, slashed forward with his sword. Fortunately, Vanessa was no longer the ignorant little girl from back then. After experiencing many battles, she also had rich experience in fighting enemies. As a mortal female thief, it was impossible for her to compete with a humanoid dragon in terms of strength. She took advantage of the recoil from her daggers and somersaulted over Nefarian's head, waiting for an opportunity to stab him in the back. However, before Vanessa launched a new attack, the remaining 4 of them still had to face the terrifying sweeping attack. Bearing the brunt of the attack, Vanessa relied on the agility of a ranger to lean back and dodge the attack by a hair's breadth. Duke was so nervous that his heart almost jumped out of his throat when he saw the Brotherhood almost cut Sasha's flesh. Next was Alusia. She chose to use Flash. In theory, with a flash of arcane light, she would appear 20 yards behind Nifa. However, the space magic that Duque could still use just now suddenly failed. A surge of shadowy energy that was as vast as the ocean easily disrupted the other elemental channels in the surroundings. Nefarian was bathed in flames. That was the radiance of the shadow flames. His dark power was forcefully eliminating all the power that did not belong to the shadow flames. Alusia's Flash was ineffective. Time seemed to have frozen. Duque had to make a choice. With his strength, this concentration of shadow power was not enough to prevent him from using Flash. If he wanted to act cool, he could even switch to a shadow priest and turn his entire body into a ball of shadow energy, using Dissipate to avoid the fatal blow. Perhaps Alusia's Ice Barrier could barely block the sword, but whether a Radiant Moon level could withstand it was still a question. Besides, no matter what, as a pure commandment priest, Kalia was doomed. Duque could even see the despair and pleading on Kalia's face. Her red lips opened slightly as if she wanted to say something. Duque knew very well that Kalia was not begging him to save her. She was telling Duque to run first. At that moment, Duque felt a stab of pain in his heart. *CK. Abandon a woman and live alone? Even if I lose all my moral integrity, I can't even break my last principle. Once a man's spine collapsed, he would never be able to straighten it again. Sacrifice a woman in exchange for saving yourself? Am I still a man? Unknowingly, a bright golden light appeared in the huge dark cover that Nefarian had created. This light had nothing to do with justice. It had nothing to do with holiness. It had nothing to do with smiting. It was purely a man's sense of duty to protect his woman. Scram. No one thought that a mere mage like Duque could let out a roar that was even more shocking than thunder. They saw Duque holding a platinum awl in his left hand and his newly upgraded spiraling sword in his right. He was the first to pounce on Nefarian. Some people exclaimed. Some people were in despair. Some people did not believe it. Some people closed their eyes. No one believed that a mere mage like Duque could use a close-range weapon to defeat a humanoid black dragon that was skilled in martial arts. Even if Duque had killed Archimonde as a battle mage, even if Duque had perfected his backstab, it was still not a head-on fight. Could Duque do it? If he couldn't, wouldn't the team lose their leader? Everyone held their breath as they watched the development of this scene. Suddenly, the situation, which was similar to an egg hitting a stone, took a shocking turn. Duque's movements suddenly sped up, while Nefarian's movements seemed to have been slowed down by many times. Acceleration, deceleration, and the wrath of the dragon, that Duque had not taken out yet. No one knew why the wrath of the dragon, that Duque refused to take out just now, was taken out now, and it even worked? That's right. Duque's swordsmanship and strength were not as good as Nefarian's. However, as long as Nefarian's strength and speed were reduced to the same level as his, Duke wouldn't be afraid no matter how good Nefarian's swordsmanship was. If he had the ability to use his two-handed sword to pick his teeth, Duke wouldn't be afraid at all. The spiraling sword that was filled with divinity of fire and wind suddenly spun like a drill, and with a piercing hum, it hit the center of the sword of the Brotherhood. The strong rotation actually caused the Brotherhood sword to fly out. Chapter 12-14. It would have been fine if Nefarian had only been sent flying, but Duque had taken advantage of the moment when the sword bounced back to slash at Nefarian's chin. If it weren't for the fact that Nifa was rather agile and managed to dodge the sword's momentum by leaning back, Nefarian's head would probably have been split in half. At this moment, disbelief was written all over everyone's face. Magni covered his wound, and his eyes were as wide as bells. Grom turned around and grinned widely. Gavinrad, who had rushed over, slashed with his sword, but Nefarian dodged it with a quick retreat. The Black Dragon King's dodging was too big. It was like a sliding step, and he slid back more than 10 meters while maintaining a half-squatting position. Impossible. How did you know? Nefarian looked as if he had seen a ghost, even though his chin was so badly mangled that he looked like a ghost himself. Phew. I knew it. Duque heaved a sigh of relief. He pretended to put his hands behind his back, but was actually gesturing to his brothers. Theon held his sword in his right hand, and covered Magnes wound with his left. He kept casting holy light on the shorty king. Kalia, who was still in shock, started chanting to heal Kane's broken leg. Pure shadow damage and physical damage were better for healing. Old Bull's body trembled, and he pressed his broken leg against his wound. He had seen too many of his brethren lose their ability to fight because of injuries. In times of peace, if there was enough food, they would still have a good ending. However, in times of war or when there was a lack of food, they would have to end their own lives. Kane had no other thoughts. He only hoped that his broken leg could be reattached. Even if he could no longer fight, he could at least work. No. My power is not enough to expel that shadow power. Kalia cried. Old Bull's eyes turned red. He panted heavily and snorted. He propped himself up with the totem pole. Grom, do you still remember what I told you before we started the battle? Shut up. The battle is not over yet. If you want to say something, you should say it yourself. I will not be the sinner. Grom was also panting heavily. Enough. Duque suddenly yelled. I will heal your leg later. With a snap of his fingers, a clear liquid immediately appeared out of thin air and wrapped around the old cow's broken leg and wound. That wonderful ball of water kept spinning clockwise, but in the blink of an eye, it was completely dyed red. Kalia was shocked. He will lose too much. I know what to do. Duke held the spiral sword in his right hand and the obsidian queen in his left as he walked towards Nefarian, who was in a sorry state. Beside Duque, Gavin, Rad, Grom, Vanessa, Alicia, and Sasha followed closely. Let's end this. Nefarian, you have at least 3 options. Duque approached Nefarian with a cold expression. 3 paths? Nefarian struggled to get up. Scarlet blood stained his black hair. His face was filled with grief and indignation. It was said that there were 3 paths, but to him none of them were paths. The first was to surrender. Duque probably wouldn't mind using him as a mount. The second was to maintain his current form as the Black Dragon Prince and be killed by the wrath of the giant dragon, created from his father's power source. The third was to accept N'Zotha's power completely and use the mysterious magic that N'Zoth had given him as a last resort. If he succeeded, not only could he expel the holy will that Duque had imposed on him, he could even turn the tables. However, if they managed to turn the tables around, it would be hard to tell who would be the one to take the fruits of victory. Escape? Sorry. For an extremely arrogant black dragon, this was never within his scope of choice. Duque's expression was cold. He obviously didn't want Nefarian to choose the third path, as it would mean a lot of unknown trouble. Unfortunately, the choice wasn't in his hands. As expected, in the next second, Nefarian's entire body started to expand again. Purplish black dragon scales, purple spikes, purple eyes filled with a strange aura, and even the shadow aura that usually filled the dragon's mouth turned into a purple gas with a sulfuric smell. Power. Power that mortals can never obtain in their entire lives. This power is so sweet and delicious. Why did I resist and hate this power so much in the past? Upon closer inspection, Nefarian's body was at least 1 size bigger than before. Even 30 meters away, one could clearly hear the cracking of his bones and the tearing of his muscles. That kind of ear-piercing sound made several heroines feel a little nauseous. In everyone's perception, Nefarian's entire body seemed to have been completely torn apart and reconstructed. His bones were forcefully stretched and his muscles were torn apart. Then, a new unknown substance grew out and forcefully filled in the empty space that was torn apart. A huge and evil power came from the depths of the ground. This power was like the most turbid of torrents, and it easily destroyed the blood hall that Nefarian had painstakingly set up so that the larger Nefarian could have a wider space to stretch his huge body. The current Nefarian was probably more than 80 meters long, right? With a wingspan of nearly 100 meters, it made people feel like he was an absolute fortress in the sky. The moonlight shone on his huge body, giving off a demonic glow. Nefarian flapped his wings in the air and laughed maniacally. Are you afraid? Are you desperate? Insignificant mortals. Tremble under my power. Nefarian spat out his venomous tongue without hesitation, venting his anger and arrogance. The corner of Duque's eyes twitched and he finally sighed. Idiot. Do you think the power of an ancient god is so easy to obtain? What's more, you shouldn't have exposed yourself to the moonlight. Sorry to trouble you, Goddess Elun. Duque said softly. Suddenly the sky and earth changed color. The moonlight was like water as it gently shone on Nefarian's body. To others, The moonlight that seemed harmless suddenly caused a terrifying change when it shone on Nefarian's body. What power is this? When Nefarian's huge dragon wings touched the moonlight, it was like a mortal's arm was placed in a pool of sulfuric acid, and it made a shocking sizzling sound. The huge dragon body fell from the sky and made a loud noise. Then he rolled on the balcony of the highest floor of the Blackrock Tower in agony. Other than Duque, everyone looked at the situation in front of them with their mouths agape. Idiot, do you think the will of a true god is so easy to expel? When I injected the will of a goddess into your body, your coordinates were already exposed to Elun's vision. Chapter 12:15. Suddenly, Sasha reminded them, "Look at the moon." Although most of the people's attention was still on Nefarian, everyone subconsciously glanced at the sky from the corner of their eyes. Then their eyes widened. The lonely moon in the sky was trembling slightly, and the stars in the sky were falling at a high speed. At that moment, the entire world of Azeroth seemed to resonate with this spectacle and trembled slightly. The thin clouds instantly dispersed, making way for these visitors from the sky. It was as if doomsday had arrived. Although Duque had seen this scene many times, he still could not suppress the shock in his heart every time he saw it. This was the power of a true god. But it was still a loss. For the sake of this starfall, King sacrificed a lot of my moral integrity. As Duque complained, he looked at the meteors falling from the sky like a spectator. These meteors were gathered into a straight line in an exaggerated manner and were accurately guided. They drew a sharp line of fire in the sky at high speed, and in the end, all of the lines of fire ended up on Nefarian's body. The overly inflated body weakened the Black Dragon King's agility. He tried his best to twist his body, but because he could not adapt to his new body, it led to the most despairing result. Every meteor landed accurately on Nefarian's back. The first two were blocked by the evil magic that erupted from his body, but from the third one onwards he could only block it with his flesh and blood. Bam! 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 Like the beating of a drum or like an earthquake, the huge impact hit Nefarian's huge body. The terrifying impact even traveled along the ground to the feet of Duque and the others. The obsidian tiles that had just been ravaged by the supersized monster Chromagus without a single crack were now almost cracking inch by inch. The entire ground was like a tsunami, moving up and down along with the huge tremors. Other than the especially nimble Vanessa and Sasha, no one else could stand firm in this kind of tremor. Seeing the terrifying meteor fragments flying in all directions, the only one who still had the energy to attack was Sasha. However, even after 11 meteorites fell, Nefarian was still alive. He stubbornly raised his head and stared at the sky. If the murderous glint in his eyes could be turned into a weapon that could cross the void, he would definitely destroy Elun first. Not enough. Duque's face was ashen. He would definitely be heavily injured, but there was always a chance. If Nefarian really managed to survive and become a complete Nefarian's apocalypse, things would get out of hand. Although the moon goddess Elun was a goddess of the righteous faction and had a large number of believers, she should be the same as the Dragon King of Dreams, Isra. There was some kind of restriction that prevented her from displaying her full power in the mortal world. Duque had shamelessly slapped Tyron many times before Tyron had the cheek to beg Elun for a one-time divine spell. Duque was not Elun's chosen one. There was too much evil in the world and Elun could not give him any more support. That was already the limit. Then, the deciding factor would be the last falling star. At this moment, Nefarian no longer had time to care about Duque. All of his attention was focused on how to deal with the last and strongest meteor fall. At this moment, attacks that could make him feel threatened came one after another. The raging flames of the fire demon's hammer. The peerless wind and thunder of the sword of lightning. The bright holy light of the Ashbringer. The three powers combined into one and blasted into his right rib, causing him to let out a miserable cry. This was not the final attack. The most important thing was that the person who had appeared at the bottom of his throat had appeared. Dooku held a dazzling dual divinity artifact sword in his hand and suddenly pierced his throat. No, every drop of magic power in all of Duque's magic circuits was on the line. He did not hold back in this attack, and it produced a destructive force that was enough to kill. Nefarian instinctively wanted to avoid this attack. Even with his evolved purple scales, it was impossible for him to block Duque's attack. However, when his neck was 3 meters back, he was horrified to discover another problem. If he maintained this speed and range, it would be equivalent to sending his head up to be hit by the last falling star. What a joke. What was the difference between this and putting his neck into the guillotine? He didn't even dare to let out his most instinctive dragon roar. Nefarian tried his best to tilt his neck to the left. Time seemed to have slowed down. Duque could even see the fear and smugness in Nefarian's eyes, because if Nefarian tilted his neck by 2 more degrees, he would be able to escape. That was if Nefarian could do it. The dragon's neck that was tilting back at high speed was suddenly stuck by something. It was a magic staff. It was stuck in the angle between the dragon's neck and back like a support. If it was an ordinary epic equipment, Nefarian's terrifying brute force would probably be able to crush it easily. Only it was a demi-artifact, the staff, Obsidian Queen, that Duque had just drained of all its mana. If Duque had a choice, he would definitely not waste it and use a demigod staff as a support. Unfortunately, the quality of the other staffs he had was not up to standard. Who knew if an epic staff of the level of Mount Hyjal would have the hardness and toughness to withstand the attack of a level 85 boss like Nefarian's Apocalypse? He could only give it away. A mage's hand secretly stuck the falling star on Nefarian's spine. This little trick made Nefarian's movements slow down for 1/10 of a second. Just 1/10 of a second. But it was exquisite to the extreme. Duque pressed against Nefarian's chin, and sent the head of the Black Dragon King right under the falling star. Boom! It was a huge collision that could shatter heaven and earth. The dazzling light flashed so brightly that none of the heroes dared to look at it. The scattered sand and stone fragments easily turned the surroundings into a mess. Cough, cough, cough. The sand and dust naturally caused people to cough. After a moment of panic, Gavin Rad was the first to react. Storm. Blow them away. With a wave of the wind sword, all the smoke and dust were blown away, revealing Nefarian's huge dragon corpse. Everyone could see that Nefarian's head had fallen off. Obviously, the current Black Dragon King that had all kinds of cruel scientific inventions was dead. Hooray! We won. Where's Duque? After instinctively cheering, everyone panicked again. Help! Duque was soaked in a pool of thick black dragon blood, almost drowning. Chapter 12:16. When Duque's last starfall hit Nefarian's head, it pierced through Nefarian's throat, followed by his cervical vertebrae. Then he activated Ice Barrier. Even with his Breaking Dawn Mage's Ice Barrier, which was many times harder than Diamond, he almost couldn't withstand it. Under the huge impact, he was directly blasted into the huge pit under Nefarian's body. When the Ice Barrier's duration ended, Duque had no choice but to retract the high-density ice elemental barrier. Tragically, he found himself soaking in a pool of dragon blood. Blurg! Duque vomited, then used the water elemental barrier to clean himself up. Under the super high standard of the system elf's micromanipulation, Duque quickly became clean and shiny. Unfortunately, the stench of dragon blood on his body was immediately despised by his lovers. Sasha, who had a very sensitive nose, made an apologetic expression and retreated. Elugia silently activated her ice barrier, purifying the surrounding air. Duque recovered slightly, then ran to Kane's side. He raised his hand, and a visible dark aura flew into the air from Kane's thigh and circled around Duque's hand. Duque squeezed his hand and it disappeared. Without any time to rest, Duque immediately switched to his priest form. At first, Duque was like a terrible priest trainee. There wasn't a single trace of holy light on him. But gradually, the holy light in the air, or rather, the holy will that had killed Nefarian, responded to Duque. Duque's lost moral integrity began to return. Twinkling like stars, they shone brilliantly. The golden light on Duque's body accumulated more and more. In a few breaths, Duque's golden light had already surpassed the level of a regional bishop. At this moment, Duque looked like a god. He was bathed in holy light, and his face was filled with kindness and love. His voice suddenly became magnetic and confident. The holy light will not give up on any warrior who fights against evil. With that, Duque opened his eyes. In his mind, the physiological knowledge he had learned in middle school, as well as the structure of the human body, were forced to appear in his mind by the system. From the system's scan, Duque could see the flow of blood in every vein as if he had X-ray vision. In this era where there was no knowledge of anatomy, it was almost impossible to reattach a severed limb. Even the most powerful priest could only make the severely injured person place his or her leg against the severed limb to promote the proliferation of cells and speed up the regeneration of the flesh and blood. As for which blood vessel, whether the muscles and tendons were connected to the right place, only God knew. Duque was different. He condensed ice with his bare hands and created 2 perfect ice tweezers in the air. First he pressed hard against Kane's leg bone and used holy light to stimulate the fusion of the bone and stimulate the growth of the bone marrow and nerves inside the leg bone. Then, at a dazzling speed, Duke used forceps to press against every broken nerve and blood vessel, and then used rune threads that he created on the spot to reconnect the blood vessels. Basically, other than the capillaries that were not connected, the large arteries, veins and slightly larger blood vessels were all connected. Finally the skin was stitched. Every stitch was stitched. When everything was done, Kane shouted in surprise, "My ancestors, I can feel my calf now." Everyone was shocked to see that Kane's toes were starting to move. "Don't move," Duque shouted. Kane instantly froze like an obedient child. Am I not healed? Under the omnipotent holy light's treatment. The old bull felt wronged, his two thick index fingers pointing at each other. Duque carefully examined Kane's thigh. It only looks healed. Many of the blood vessels inside might not be able to be reconnected. Some of the muscles and blood vessels might die. For the next 2 months, you are not allowed to go anywhere in Stormwind City. Otherwise you will still be a one-legged bull. 2 months? Kane shouted in shock. The attending doctor, Duque, had a stern look in his eyes. It will take 100 days for the tendons and bones to recover. I said 2 months because of your amazing regenerative ability. Suddenly Duque realized that Grom was not there. Before Duque could ask, Theon said, "Grom said he went to kill the traitor." If he had not mentioned it, Duque would have forgotten that Lord Howl had risked his life to kill that idiot Ren Blackhand. Instead of being the orc chief, he had become the Black Dragon's dog. In any case, Nefarian had been killed, and the evil faction in the world had lost another flag. After defeating the boss, how could he not loot the corpse? Of course, Duque was not interested in the Shadow Flame staff, or the Judgment set. There was something better in this world. Although the best equipment was bound to the soul, it could still be taken away as long as the owner was not decided. The hero team could not use it, but there were second-rate and third-rate people waiting for it. The only surprise was that Duque had found something incredible in Nefarian's dimensional bag. It looked like an ordinary greatsword of the Brotherhood, but the result of the system scan was Reforged Ashkandi, Greatsword of the Brotherhood. Although the quality of this sword was still epic in the game, it was an exquisite item that could only be found in level 85 dungeons. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the best sword below divine weapons. Good sword. Unfortunately, no one wanted to use it here. Everyone here who could use a two-handed greatsword basically had a divine weapon. There was no such thing as an outdated divine weapon in this world. As long as they had better materials, they could increase their damage by another level. That was why no one wanted it, so they simply left it to Duque to handle. Duque casually put away the greatsword and looked at his palm. At this moment, 3 gloomy flames floated in the air less than 5 centimeters above his palm. The divinity of fire and wind and thunder were collected earlier, and the new divinity of shadow was the spoils of war from killing Nefarian. Duque did not expect that he would have such a high affinity with the shadow element. Now it was Duque's turn to be troubled. In this world, even the moon goddess Elun, whom he was most familiar with, would not tell him how to become a god. That was because every path to godhood was unique. But even a fool knew that the more types of divinity one obtained, the harder it would be to integrate them all. Moreover, a god with fire, wind and thunder and shadow. What kind of god was this? Duke's head started to hurt. Just as Duque was thinking, Grom, who was covered in blood, returned. The blood-stained Blood Howl hung behind Lord Howl. Even though he was a little old, even though his hair was a little white, even though one of his hands was broken, Lord Howl was still Lord Howl. The hideous head in his remaining right hand said it all. Raising Ren Blackhand's head high, Lord Howl roared, "Loktar Ogre." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.